Good Thursday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for August the 31st. Today we are reading together in 1 Kings chapter 5 and also 1 Kings chapter 6, which is going to tell us about the plans for building the temple and then Solomon executing the plan to build the temple in chapter 6. So let me get the text up on the screen for us, and we'll see this along together. 1 Kings chapters 5 and 6 again. We're going to see the building materials being gathered, and then we will see the implementation of those building materials being used to put together the temple, to construct the temple into the glorious dwelling place for Yahweh. So him and his presence can be among his people in a very intimate and special way. So reading together here in 1 Kings chapter 5, verse number 1, King Hiram of Tyre sent his emissaries to Solomon when he heard that he had been anointed king in his father's place, for Hiram had always been friends with David. Solomon sent this message to Hiram: "You know, my father David was not able to build a temple for the name of Yahweh his God. This was because of the warfare all around him until Yahweh put his enemies under his feet. Yahweh my God has now given me rest on every side. There is no enemy or misfortune. So I plan to build a temple for the name of Yahweh my God, according to what Yahweh promised my father David. I will put your son on your throne in your place, and he will build the temple for my name. Therefore, command that cedars from Lebanon be cut down for me. My servants will be with your servants, and I will pay your servants' wages according to whatever you ask, for you know that not a man among us knows how to cut timber like the Sidonians." When Hiram heard Solomon's words, he rejoiced greatly and said, "Blessed be Yahweh today. He has given David a wise son to be over this great people." When Hiram sent a reply to Solomon saying, "I have heard your message. I will do everything you want regarding the cedar and cypress timber. My servants will bring the logs down from Lebanon to the sea, and I will make them into rafts to go by sea to the place where you indicate. I will break them apart there, and you can take them away. You then can meet my needs by providing my household with food." So Hiram provided Solomon with all the cedar and cypress timber he wanted, and Solomon provided Hiram with 120,000 bushels of wheat as food for his household and 120,000 gallons of oil from crushed olives. Solomon did this for Hiram year after year. Yahweh gave Solomon wisdom as he had promised, and there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. Then King Solomon drafted forced laborers from all Israel. The labor force numbered 30,000 men. He sent 10,000 to Lebanon each month in shifts. 1 month they were in Lebanon, 2 months they were at home. Adoniram was in charge of the forced labor. Solomon had 70,000 porters and 80,000 stonecutters in the mountains, not including his 3,300 deputies in charge of the work. They supervised the people doing the work, and the king commanded them to quarry large, costly stones to lay the foundation of the temple with dressed stones. So Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders, along with the Gebalites, quarried the stone and prepared the timber and the stone for the temple's construction. 1 Kings chapter 6, Solomon began to build the temple for Yahweh in the 480th year after the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of his reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month. The temple that King Solomon built for Yahweh was 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 45 feet high. The portico was in front of the temple sanctuary, or the portico in front of the temple sanctuary was 30 feet long, extending across the temple's width, and 15 feet deep in front of the temple. He also made windows and beveled frames for the temple. He then built a chambered structure along the temple wall, encircling the walls of the temple. That is the sanctuary and the inner sanctuary. And he made side chambers all around. The lowest chamber was 7.5 feet wide, the middle was 9 feet wide, and the third was 10.5 feet wide. He also provided offset ledges for the temple all around the outside so that nothing would be inserted into the temple walls. The temple's construction used finished stones cut at the quarry so that no hammer, chisel, or any iron tool was heard in the temple while it was being built. The door for the lowest side chamber was on the right side of the temple. They went up a stairway to the middle chamber, and from the middle to the third. When he finished building the temple, he paneled it with boards and planks of cedar. He built the chambers along the entire temple, joined to the temple with cedar beams. Each story was 7.5 feet high. The word of Yahweh came to Solomon, "As for this temple you are building, if you walk in my statutes, observe my ordinances, and keep all my commands by walking in them, I will fulfill my promise to you, which I made to your father David. I will dwell among the Israelites and not abandon my people Israel." When Solomon finished building the temple, he paneled the interior temple walls with cedar boards. From the temple floor to the surface of the ceiling, he overlaid the interior with wood. He also overlaid the floor with cypress boards. Then he lined 30 feet of the rear of the temple with cedar boards from the floor to the surface of the ceiling, and he built the interior as an inner sanctuary, the most holy place. The temple, that is the sanctuary in front of the most holy place, was 60 feet long. The cedar paneling inside the temple was carved with ornamental gourds and flower blossoms. Everything was cedar, not a stone could be seen. He prepared the inner sanctuary inside the temple to put the Ark of Yahweh's covenant there. The interior of the sanctuary was 30 feet long, 30 feet high, 30 feet wide and 30 feet high. He overlaid it with pure gold. He also overlaid the cedar altar. Next, Solomon overlaid the interior of the temple with pure gold, and he hung gold chains across the front of the inner sanctuary and overlaid it with gold. So he added the gold overlay to the entire temple until everything was completely finished, including the entire altar that belonged to the inner sanctuary. In the inner sanctuary, he made 2 cherubim, 15 feet high, of olive wood. One wing of the first cherub was 7.5 feet long, and the other wing was 7.5 feet long. The wingspan was 15 feet from tip to tip. The second cherub was also 15 feet. Both cherub had the same size and shape. The first cherub's height was 15 feet, and so was the second cherub's. Then he put the cherubim inside the inner temple. Since their wings were spread out, the first one's wings touched one wall, while the second cherub's wing touched the other wall. And in the middle of the temple, their wings were touching wing to wing. He also overlaid the cherubim with gold. He carved all the surrounding temple walls with carved engravings, cherubim, palm trees, and flower blossoms in the inner and outer sanctuaries. He overlaid the temple floor with gold in both the inner and outer sanctuaries. For the entrance of the inner sanctuary, he made olive wood doors. The pillars of the doorposts were 5-sided. The 2 doors were made of olive wood. He carved cherubim, palm trees, and flower blossoms on them and overlaid them with gold, hammering gold over the cherubim and palm trees. In the same way, he made 4-sided olive wood doorposts for the sanctuary entrance. The 2 doors were made of cypress wood. The first door had 2 folding sides, and the second door had 2 folding panels. He carved cherubim, palm trees, and flower blossoms on them and overlaid them with gold applied evenly over the carving. He built the inner courtyard with 3 rows of dressed stones and a row of trimmed cedar beams. The foundation of Yahweh's temple was laid in Solomon's 4th year in the month of Ziv. In this 11th year, Ziv, in the month of Ziv. In his 11th year, in the month of Bul, which is the 8th month, the temple was completed in every detail and according to every specification. So he built it in 7 years. And that is the reading of 1 Kings chapter 5 and 1 Kings chapter 6. The text begins, our text we read today begins with this note for us from the author that David was friends with the king of Tyre, with Hiram. Now, somebody might bristle at that a little bit. It's like, how is that supposed to be? Shouldn't Israel have seen everyone not a part of them as being an enemy? And no, that's actually not the case at all. Remember going back to the story of Joshua. Remember that provision within the instructions to carry out herem against the land of Canaan was that anybody that lived in Canaan, they needed to be herem, they need to be taken out. But if somebody was from a faraway place, then if they would be peaceful with you, you were allowed to be peaceful with them. You were allowed to exist alongside them. Remember, the Gibeonites took advantage of this provision within the instructions. So Tyre, being a faraway kingdom, was able to make peace with Israel, and it seems that King Hiram had made that peace with King David, that they had always been friends together. So because of that, Solomon has this rapport in which he knows that he can work together with the king of Tyre. So he sends off to him and says, my father was not able to build the temple for our God Yahweh because there was always war going on. And but now, right now, the enemies are under my feet. There is a time of war, there's a time of rest on every side from war. There's no enemy, there's no crisis, there's nothing going on right at the moment. So it is an opportunity for us to build this great temple. Now I want to tie that together with what we see in verse 13, in the fact that Solomon drafted forced laborers from all Israel. The forced laborers numbered 30,000 men. This would not have been possible. It would not have been possible for him to have 30,000 workers had this been during a time of war, because more than likely those workers would have been a part of the army that was fighting in the war. So we see just the logical nature of Solomon. We're at a time of peace. We have people to spare. We're going to get to work on this right here and right now. And that's what he wants to do. He says, I want to plant a temple for the name of Yahweh, my God, according to what he promised my father David. And the way that we can do this is if you will supply us with wood. The kingdom of Tyre, which I believe is in modern day Lebanon, was again very suitable for this, known for their vast forest of cedar and cypress trees. So they were a normal provider of wood products for the kingdoms around them. Solomon says, I'd like to do this, and King Hiram is blessed, or feels blessed by this. He is thankful for the opportunity to work together with David, his friend's son. And he says, we'll do this, and in exchange, you can provide us with food. So this was not just a straight up gift that Hiram was given to Solomon, but there was a legitimate business transaction that was taking place. He would provide the wood for the temple, and Solomon would in turn provide food for his kingdom, which is exactly what we see in verses 7 through 11. I want to note verse number 12, that Yahweh gave Solomon wisdom as he had promised him, and there was peace between Solomon and Hiram's kingdom. Part of that wisdom was having good management. He had the workforce and split it up into three different groups, 10,000 in each group, and they worked one out of every 3 months, which again was smart because that would not overwork the task force. They would be off to work for a month, and then they would come back at home for 2 months, and they end up doing this for a total of about I believe it'd be 4-ish years. It says in the 4th year they actually began the construction for the temple. So it seems it took, 3 to 4 years to get all the supplies ready to go, and then it'll be another 3 to 4 years for the construction to actually take place. The text tells us that the stones were quarried at a separate location, and they were prepared completely and then brought to the temple complex. Part of that is said in verse number 7, that the temple's construction used finished stones cut out the quarry, so that no hammer, chisel, or any iron tool was heard in the temple while it was being built. So this was not just a huge noise issue that was taking place during the construction of the temple. It seemed to be a relatively peaceful and calm construction without the normal banging and hammering and chiseling that we would think would be associated with this. All that was taking place off-site. Now, I want to note as well verses 11, 12, and 13, that the word of Yahweh came to Solomon, as for the temple you are building, if you walk in my statutes, observe my ordinances, and keep all my commands by walking in them, I will fulfill my promise to you, which I made to your father David. I will dwell among the Israelites and not abandon my people Israel. The temple's glory would remain so long as there was covenant faithfulness and loyalty among the king and his people. That's the condition that Yahweh is making with him. I appreciate you making this house for me. I want to dwell in this house with you, but that's only going to happen if you maintain covenant faithfulness and loyalty. If you don't walk in my statutes, if you don't observe my ordinances, if you don't keep my commands, then guess what? That's just going to be some building. It's going to be a beautiful building, yes, but it's just going to be some building, because I won't be there. And that's really the true majesty and glory of Solomon's temple. It wasn't in the size. I want to note that was not in the size. Did you catch? One of the things I appreciate about the CSB is the fact that it puts the measurements in modern terms. It has footnotes in the bottom, which give us the original terms, such as 60 cubits, 20 cubits, 30 cubits, 10 cubits, all that is there. But in the CSB, it gives us straight up just our normal measurements. So it has that the temple was 90 feet long, it was 30 feet wide, and 45 feet tall. You want to know something that has almost those exact dimensions minus the height? It's actually our church building. Our church house, I measured it on Google Maps, is 98 feet from the front to the back, and it is 36 feet from side to side. I think that is the widest portion is 36 feet. How crazy is that? How crazy that our church building is almost the exact size of the temple. But think about that. That's the temple. Solomon's temple in all of its glory was about the same size, add on some height to it, about the same size as our church building. That's not very big. I don't know how you've thought about just imagining the temple before. I know for me, I imagine some massive building, but that actually wasn't the case. Now, the temple complex around it was a bit larger. We read about the porticos and stuff in front of it. That does make it a bit bigger, but the actual temple itself was not that big. So the glory of Solomon's temple is not in its quantity. It's not in its size. Instead, though, it is in its quality. And not just in the fact that it was made with the best supplies, that it was overlaid with gold, that had these huge 15-foot wide cherubim that touched wing to wing and spread across the entirety of the Holy of Holies. It's not in all that. It's not in the wood or the gold materials or the craftsmanship. It's not in that. The glory was in Yahweh's presence. And Yahweh's presence would always be there so long as they walked in his statutes, observed his ordinances, and kept his commands. In doing those three things, the glory of this temple would remain. Now, of course, we're thinking about a temple. We put this in New Testament terms to recognize that we are the temple. God's people are the temple in which his presence dwells. And the same thing is true about us. You know, we're not the greatest in number on the earth. We're not necessarily the best in any sort of tangible terms or anything that can be quantified. But we are glorious in the fact that God's presence is with us. And in that we can boast. Again, not in our size, not in any sort of tangible quality, but in the fact that Yahweh's presence is with us. And let's remember that. Always remember that the defining factor in anything is the presence of Yahweh. And that's what was so glorious about this temple. Yes, it was beautiful from a tangible perspective. Yes, it was. But what truly made it great was that Yahweh's presence remained there. And if that ever left, well, trouble would soon follow, and that's what we're going to see, unfortunately, as we move forward in the history of Israel. But for today, chapters 5 and 6 of 1 Kings, this is a good day. It's a good day to see Solomon's temple being completed and for God's glory to be there. And it was truly a moment for great rejoicing among Israel. If you have any questions or comments about this text, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. And I appreciate you reading along with me today on this Good Thursday. Hope you have a great rest of your Thursday, and hope you're planning to join me again tomorrow as we read together in chapter 7 of 1 Kings. We're going to read next about Solomon's palace. The temple, pretty awesome. Solomon's palace, actually ends up being pretty awesome as well. And I wonder if there's any implications we need to take away from that. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. Again, have a great rest of your Thursday, everyone. Take care and God bless.